So I'll call the meeting to order again at 7:02 p.m. Ask if there is a volunteer to take minutes for this evening. A template was included with the call to meeting.
I'll take it again.
Okay, I appreciate that, Carl. It's just I don't want to take minutes and run the meeting. It's a little awkward. I appreciate you being willing to do that. So we are going to. I will take a motion to adjourn into executive session for contract negotiations with a non-union employee, Director of Business and Finance, Dan Dede, per Mass General Law, Chapter 30A, Section 21A, to return to public session at the conclusion of the executive session. Anyone like to make that motion?
I'll move.
Okay, it's been moved. Is there a second?
Second.
Member Sullivan seconds. So we'll do a roll call vote. Member Gustafson?
Yes.
Member Sullivan?
Yes.
Member Otmar?
Yes.
And Mills, yes. So we will adjourn to executive sessions. That just means we hang up this call and then go to the other link in your email.
No, I'm just actually.
Hi, Dan, it's Wendy. I got an email from Kim McCormick. Kim, are you on the call?
They're in
Hi,
executive,
Hi,
they're in
Randy.
they're in executive session. Kim.
No, I know that, but I got an email from Kim that she couldn't get in, so I just
Yeah,
wanted to
but-
make sure.
Thank you, Randy. I realized I was on the wrong email account.
Oh, okay.
So then I'm like, why won't it let me in? And then I
Okay.
realized, but thank you. Sorry. I should have emailed you back to say I figured it out.
Okay. All right, good.
I'm
Thank
sorry.
you. All right, no
Okay.
problem. Have a good night.
Thanks. You too.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Dan, what executive session are they in?
My contract.
Oh, sorry. Okay.
That's okay.
I just didn't know they had an executive session outside of school committee.
Actually, there are three people. I don't know if you know this or not. There are three people that school committee appoints. Superintendent obviously is one.
Yeah.
Secondly, is myself, and then the third is the sped director.
Oh. Ooh,
Yep.
I'm on two accounts. Wait a minute. Why am I doing that? Am I in two accounts or am I in one account?
No, you're one. I'm the two because I'm presenting.
Ah,
So what if I could just ask what do you see? What are you seeing right now?
well, before Randy came on, I saw your agenda, but now I don't see anything.
Okay. No, so let me just say this. See it now?
Yep. I see your
And
agenda.
you see the executive summary
Yep.
and you see attachment A.
Yep.
All right, you're good.
Yep. Perfect.
I'm not being antisocial. I'm sorry.
Oh, no, don't worry about it.
Kind of lost in thought here.
I'm sure you'll be fine.
Lost in thought.
Okay.
Just so that you know, I didn't shut off the recording, so this is we're still being recorded, but there's nothing happening. I just thought I
That's
would.
all right. That's how my day's going. It's all right. It's all good.
Okay. You still there, Kim?
Yeah, I
Um,
am.
But I'm just curious, where do you teach? I mean, I
teach
can look it
first.
up.
I teach first grade at Naquag.
Nick, okay.
Yes, and I had 18 students today. It was wonderful.
Excellent.
It was awesome.
It was like September 1st again.
Yeah, the kids are so happy. It was awesome.
Good.
Yeah,
Good stuff.
it is. It's good. Oh, here we go. Hey, Daryl, I read your newsletter.
Oh, how was it?
I like the part when you said, please be patient if your child's not in school or something about the work. I was like, yes,
See?
thank you.
Yeah, I told you I'd put it in.
That was awesome.
Well, we just had to have something in there. Yet again, when we talked to the principals about it, they're like, and it's interesting. I just read an article about that where they were talking about people who, it's actually a superintendent in the state that they have a lot of families who want to work remotely, not in their town. So,
Oh, that's weird.
yeah.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it.
Oh, you're welcome. No problem.
All right, so we are back, and Dan, if you wouldn't mind muting when you're not on, there's just a lot of feedback. I was mentioning to the superintendent that he needs to buy you a headset as a special staff gift, to kind of prevent some of that. All right, I'm sure Malaya will rejoin us when the technology catches up. So our next item on the agenda is update on fiscal year 20. So the three items that are under this are the audit, the annual report, and the fiscal year expense budget report. I think Dan's going to give us a very brief update on the audit because Ben and his very capable subcommittee on audit advisory should probably get the first bite on the details of that. But he can just give us a process moment of where we are, and then we can turn to things that are more BNF's primary role. So Dan, you want to take it over?
Sure thing, Ken. Thank you, and that's correct. I received this draft about 2 weeks ago, and I went back and forth with Melanson CPAs on a couple of things. So they're still in the process of fine tuning some things. We even spoke about something this afternoon, and as you noted, Ken, the audit, when it does get finalized, probably by the end of this week, I'll be reaching out to Ben, and I did earlier as well, and I'll make him aware that the audit is final. In the initial draft, there were 4 findings, and again, initial keywords there, initial draft. We're looking at 1 or 2 of those. Secondly, just want to make the committee aware, and Ben as well, that the end of the year report audit has been pushed back. The deadline typically would be March 31st. And that's been pushed out now to June 30 of 2021. So next steps. Next steps is I've actually got another call tomorrow with the manager to just tweak one more outstanding item that we were going back and forth on today. And then they're going to move it up to their senior manager, and who's already looked at it. They're going to look at the management's response to the findings, and as I said, we'll hopefully have a final product by the end of this week. And then I can work with Ben and get the audit advisory board together, and we can do a presentation. We'll get into the weeds for sure with that. This committee is certainly very welcome to attend that meeting as well. The second item here, again, this is a FY20 item, and this is an annual report that our financial advisors filed on behalf of the district. And the reason for this is that we are required the advisors are required on our behalf to file the annual disclosure statement. And the annual disclosure statement, by definition, contains a lot of financial, but also a lot of demographic information relative to the district's financial position. And what this information does, it just allows our lenders to see where we are at in terms of our financials, and if we are a good risk, if you will, in terms of any borrowing. And then the last item here relative to FY20, and I'm going to scroll down real quickly, is a budget report that I ran last week. And just wanted to bring the committee up to date, and I apologize. As you can see, this is all part of the draft audit. We'll get there soon enough. All right.
Can you tell us what page you're on when you that, Dan? So if we have our
Sure thing.
at home.
Yep. So this was going to be attachment C, and it's going to be page. We're almost there. Almost there. Page 120. Page 120. I'm assuming that you can all see this. As you know, we brought forward into FY21 1.6. As you can see here, of that 1.6, 1.4 was allocated to transportation. You can see the year-to-date. That's the payment that we made to AA Transportation, just under $833,000. There is an encumbrance remaining of $263,000 and change, and there were some other encumbrances last week, but we closed those out since we are well into the early part of April. So right now, there is on our bottom line from FY20, which becomes part of FY21, and even before we talk about E&D for FY21, that 361, almost 362 plus is on our bottom line, and we can't use that money for anything aside from how it was allocated when we brought it forward into FY21.
So I'm not sure if this is a question for you or the superintendent or both, but I assume Vanpool is part of that. Is that going to be something that the committee will be addressing upcoming, or is legal working on that?
They are, Ken, so I can take that question. Legal is working with Vanpool to resolve that outstanding issue from the fourth quarter of FY20. Our counsel is negotiating with their counsel, and hopefully we'll have some closure to that fairly immediately.
One question I have, and I'm not sure if we're allowed, but can you use this? So you said this can only be, this 349 of it can only be used for transportation expenses, the 349K.
So I'm sorry, Ben, the 349K is the available budget. So there's an encumbrance there. That 263, 286 and 8 cents. That's what's allocated for the final readiness payment to Vanpool.
No, I understand, and maybe I might not have heard, but so since this was carried ahead from last fiscal year,
yes,
and this is the issue we got into a little bit, that if we knew we were going to carry it ahead, we could have shifted it into a different fund and had more I guess freedom with it, but since it has to be used for transportation, is there any way for us to offset some of the money we have in fiscal year 21's transportation budget and then pull some of that money out of the 21 budget? Because since we haven't carried that forward, it's actually can be moved around a little easier than the rules as it relates to this carry forward.
Unfortunately, we can't. In essence, the the 361 that's sitting there, that's as if we were the fiscal year was over. We can't touch that money. We can't reallocate it. We can't do anything with it. And when I get into reviewing the expense budget for FY21, I'll show you where we have captured the money that'll be transferred into the stabilization for FY22. So the only I don't want to say flexibility, but the only ability that we have here is this 263 and change that's encumbered is to make a payment base of that encumbrance. Again, that doesn't reflect the actual payment, but and then once that payment is made, that purchase order gets closed out, and whatever falls to the bottom line falls to the bottom line, and that 361 is increased by the balance of that payment.
Now, ideally, we get this settled by the end of the year. If we don't, then we can use circuit breaker money next year, right, to pay that bill if it settles next year because of special education transportation. So there's probably some shifting around, or we could that you could do like on June 28th or something of saying, okay, I know I'm going to have to spend $250 in circuit breaker next year, so let me think about what I'm moving forward or not moving forward, knowing that this is going to fall to next year's bottom line if it doesn't. There's creative ways around it, right? Of what you carry forward or don't in a legal way, I would suspect. Hopefully it doesn't come to that.
Yeah, there
Right.
are. And just to jump in real quick, Dan and I met on this, a couple of weeks ago, and one of the things that I said was we need to get this resolved by, prior to the end of this fiscal year. So we do have Joe Bartulis working on this, working directly with their legal team on the other side. So we're hoping that this can get wrapped up, as Dan said, sooner rather than later.
So any questions at all about this here?
So just to be clear, or so I understand it right, so that 361 available budget, that's money that we can't touch the rest of this year, and it's going to end up going to be dumped into E&D at the end of the year.
Yes.
Okay.
If we don't use it to pay van pool before the end of the year.
Well, not the 349 though. It doesn't include any of that.
Oh yeah.
So there's an encumbrance there. You can see the encumbrance of 263, 286 and 8 cents. And again, we had invoices from Vanpool at the end of FY20, and what we did was that we reduced the encumbrance in at the latter part of FY20 based upon a greater percentage than what we think we're actually going to be paying them come prior to June 30. So not all of that 263 hopefully will be used for Vanpool. I'm trying to walk a fine line here, and just being sensitive to the negotiations that are ongoing.
But I mean, I guess the quote unquote bottom line with this is that no matter what happens with our FY21 budget, so like no matter where things shake out the rest of this FY, there is at least 361 that's being added to E&D,
Yes.
irrespective of what happens in 21.
Yes. Yes.
Are there other questions about this this topic? All right, so our next item on the agenda is broadly an update on fiscal year 21. Dan, if you wouldn't mind just hitting the mute. So we'll talk about regional transportation. We'll talk about SPED tuition carry forwards, where we are with the general fund, and 3 budget transfers that we had asked Dan at our last meeting to kind of narrow down his number, because we had an extra 2 weeks for him to think about it. that we'll be looking to bring forward to the full committee. So Dan, do you want to start us off with regional transportation?
All right, thanks, Ken. I'll get the knack of muting myself sooner than later. So what you have here is a snapshot taken from vendor web. We did receive our initial payment in regional transportation for FY21. It was a couple months late. That's for sure. As we've talked about in the past, so the payment was the 872,000 and change, and this payment does reflect the second and final adjustment that the DESI made from FY18. As the committee knows, given the overpayments that were made at that time, approximately $275,000, given the issue with the end of the year report. And as the committee knows, that methodology has been corrected. It's one of the first things that I tackled. It was the first thing that I tackled when I started here a couple of years ago. And that the methodology that we now use is auditor tested, if you will. It's DESI tested, so we are good moving forward. Any questions about that?
It's still pretty conservative. I know we're like nervous and of course dotting our I's and crossing our T's or whatever. I still will hold that we're overly conservative now on the other way of reporting, but that's a conversation for another day. So are we anticipating that 1.07 for our next payment, the adding in the 135 if they took off 135 this time?
That's correct. That's excuse me. That's independent of the amended EOR, and I don't want to speculate what that payment will be. Once they factor that additional 500,000 into the payment.
So asking about that. You mentioned the EOR audit being pushed back, which makes sense since I know some districts hadn't even filed theirs and we amended ours. I assume we're just in a waiting pattern from Jay Sullivan of considering our revised. Is there some point where he's like, hey, this is your new EOR, I accept this? Or is it just kind of like go into the winds and blow about?
No, so even though the deadline was pushed out to the end of June, certainly auditing firms can complete their audits of districts, and to my knowledge, he has all of the outstanding EORs that he was waiting on. So I'll probably give him just a couple more weeks, and I'll ask the question. And I think we talked about this briefly. Can you estimate what our second and final payment will be for FY21, given what I amended, and hopefully I'll know that by the end of the month. That's the goal that I'm working towards.
Well, as long as we know about it soon enough to do budget transfers before is it June 15th or July 15th? July 15th, right? Would be good. Any questions on that topic? Okay, so Dan, what do you got next?
Alrighty, so next up is FY21 tuitions, and you have here just a brief snapshot of all the revenues for tuitions for this year. 2.7 in the general fund. We have almost 3.3 in FY21 circuit breaker. We brought forward a million plus from FY20, and in the 240 grant, 1.5 million. So total revenues is approximately 8.6 million. In terms of expenditures, again, through April 1st, we were looking at approximately 6.8 million across all funds. So we just got to ensure that we've got the money in the proper buckets. There's a waiting list. We've talked about this in the past, not too much this year. but a waiting list of about 68,508. So the estimated expenditures for this year is 6.9, and that is inclusive of the waiting list. And again, I work very closely with Director Smith, especially relative to the waiting list, if need be, to scale back that number. So our estimated balance as of now, April 5th, is just under 1.7 million, bringing forward into FY22. We talked about this, back in March. The goal was 1.5, so we're slightly above that. And again, we'll be watching this very, very closely to ensure that we keep it at the 1.5 minimally that we talked about for the FY22 budget.
Questions people have about that? And I know you have. I'm just dotting my I's and crossing my T's by asking, but you've exhausted the fiscal year 20 circuit breaker carry forward first, right? Since we can't carry that forward another year.
That's correct. Yes. Yep.
Question for you, Dan, and I don't know if you know the answer to this. So 6.9 that we pay in special ed tuitions, how many students is that total?
I actually could answer that. It's in a different screen. I just can't pull it up. I'll get you that exact number though.
Carl, you know what? If we're just talking purely out of district, it's probably between 68 and 72.
Because that number is just the out of district, isn't it, for tuitions?
Yes, that number, those numbers, those are out of district tuitions for FY21.
So rough number then is that for every one student that goes out of district special ed, that costs us $100,000.
Yeah, give or take, Carl. I think part of this comes down to you have different placements cost different amounts of money. So it probably averages out somewhere in the 70 to 90,000 range. Probably not as high as 100, but don't quote me. we can take a look at that information though. And
so I guess what I'm kind of leading, and I guess what it kind of leads towards is, are there, and again, it leads to the question of are there things that we could add to our district that would bring more of those students back?
Yep. So we actually had a conversation today about that with one of our programs to actually keep a couple of kids from going out and maybe bring a couple of kids back in. The other thing we have to remember is we get a percentage of that dollar amount back. So let's just say it's $100,000. You get the circuit breaker reimbursement associated with a student who's out of district. So you get a portion of that money back. So sometimes it's less expensive to have a student out of district. Not that we want that, but sometimes it is less expensive to do that.
Okay, that's good to know. I didn't realize some of the nuances behind how that works. So, okay, thank you.
So these figures here, Kyle, this is what Director Smith is submitting to DESE, and this will be part of our circuit breaker claims for next year, and we'll know that information probably the third week in September. Typically, that's when DESE publishes the initial claims and also the initial reimbursement percent for 22.
Where have those circuit breaker percentages fallen for reimbursement, or have they been all over the place?
The past couple years in the 70% thereabouts.
Oh,
it's been strong. Okay. Yeah.
I think, you know, I would guess, Carl, that it'll be at least 70% this year.
And it's 70% after the threshold, so it's not 70% of the total cost. And then it's also the year after. So if someone in a big district like us, I imagine it's probably a wash because kids leave, kids go. But in a small district, of course, the fact that it's next year's is when you get the money could be a problem.
Right.
Any other questions relative to circuit breaker or to tuitions?
So just quickly, what is that threshold that you just mentioned?
So it's 4 times. So the rule of thumb is 4 times foundation. And what does that mean? Typically in mid to upper 40s, $45,000 to $47,000.
So we would get 70% of the difference back from that the next year.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
Assuming that the rules don't change. And I guess anything is possible, but yes. Yeah.
And one way it should change for the positive next year, maybe, is being able to also submit for out of transportation to out of district placements. That's part of the SOA that was coming in for money. Because right now we don't get any reimbursement for out of district transportation for special education.
Correct. And right now in the governor's budget, the SOA is being implemented, is being phased in. Year 1 is 25% reimbursement for sped transportation.
But that can be a lot per kid, you know, if you're taking one student to a farther away place. So it's a good change for the state to recognize the full cost of you know, the students we're responsible for.
Well, and Dan and I were talking about this with Chris Smith the other day. Vans and buses are comparable in terms of prices. So a van is almost the same cost as a bus.
I have a very curious question because we're on this topic. I know there's some parents that drive their students and we reimburse them. Does that also count toward the sped transportation out of district, or is that a different pool?
You know, I'd have to look at the claims. I believe that's included in the number, but let me confirm that, Malaya. Let me just confirm that.
It was really more of a curiosity. I mean, I don't need to know the second. I was just curious if that was included in the reimbursable, you know, potentially reimbursable expenses.
And is that mileage rate going up next year? Is that?
To my knowledge, no. It's staying the same, even though fuel is increasing. Anything else here? All right. Next is review of the general funds, both revenues and expenditures for FY21. So this is our revenue report taken out of Munis. I'm going to skip right down to the revised projections in terms of revenue. Again, we've talked about Chapter 70, so that is below the benchmark of almost $409,000. So I've revised the projections on regional transportation even since our last meeting. And again, knowing now that we know what the first payment was, and again, adding back to that the 133 and change, and then estimating the second payment, where we're looking at a little bit under 1.9 at 1,877 and change. So as of right now, that we're 553,000 below the benchmark, but that's a fluid number, and I think that well, that number will change, and the variance will be reduced once I know what will be eligible for with the additional with the amendment. But again, I'm not going to project that or conjecture on that, but I'll hopefully get a definitive answer from Desi by the latter part of this month. I want to skip down to Medicaid, and again, we have increased the benchmark, where we're going to exceed our benchmark by almost $100,000. And kudos to Christine Smith. Kudos to Susan Soper, our Medicaid coordinator, and also kudos to all the staff, all the clinicians, the psychologist, and all staff. And I know I'm forgetting someone, so I apologize for forgetting, that function. The teachers, for the great work that they're doing, in terms of documenting what they're doing, that enables us to garner these dollars. We though we haven't received it yet officially, unofficially, for example, our cost report in June, and that's the big payment that we receive every year. That payment in June is approximately $166,000. Last year, we were still paying back money because we were overpaid last year, I think by $20,000. It was a very small amount, but now we're to the good $166,000, and so again, we're looking at exceeding the benchmark by almost 100,000, 95 and change. In terms of the interest, again, I had reduced this at our last meeting. Miscellaneous. Again, I tweaked this since our last meeting. We have through January invoices out to districts just under $90,000, and that's through January. So this figure here of $120,000 is a pretty conservative figure, and again, we can accrue revenue through September 30 of 2021. So the invoices that I signed off on last week and the week before that have gone out to districts across the Commonwealth, we have until September 30 to book those dollars. So I'm anticipating that the next series of invoices will certainly get us beyond the $120,000 that I'm projecting. So in terms of total revenues, again, we're looking at 101 million for FY 21, and again, assuming that there aren't any additional surprises here. Before I get into the expense side, I'd like to just stay with this for another minute or two, and I'm happy to answer any questions in terms of the revenues.
Do folks have revenue questions? I'll throw a couple at you if that's possible. Would you mind just putting that slide back up? This is, again, a sort of just curious question, and I know it's not a revenue question, it's an expense question, but it's related. If you just scroll down, what we're charging the other districts, how does that compare to what they charge us? Like, is this a net neutral at the end of the day, or are we more aggressive at going for districts for this?
We're more aggressive, Ken. I haven't received any invoices from other districts, and again, these invoices that we have sent out for transportation services that we're providing through our provider for students attending Devereux. So we are very aggressive in trying to generate this income.
And Medicaid is awesome. I mean, I think this is a great story. We're getting our paperwork in. Two things just to be the negativski, but I mean, it's great. It's awesome. One, this year, of course, we had, I think, expanded deadlines for submitting documentation. So we'll want to make sure we're on top of that. Once the state takes away that that rule, right, that we didn't get used to it. And secondly, we were, of course, probably generating more than this in claims in the past, right? But we just weren't documenting them properly. So I feel like we're still like $300,000, $400,000 off of where we were at our high water mark, and we weren't doing the claims right. So that's not a fair thing that we could get back to. But if we're still creating the same activity, it seems as though we have potential for growth in this line downstream. Is that, Daryl seems to be nodding, is that a fair statement?
It's a very fair statement, Ken. Two things. Number one is, as I mentioned at the last meeting, again, given the pandemic, the 90-day window of when staff can enter their data, their claims, is out the window, if you will, for this year. Everything is retro back to July 1 of 2020. That won't last long, probably not much beyond this year. So we're very fortunate there. Number two, I think the hiring of Sue Soper, our Medicaid coordinator, is just huge. And Ken, I think I mentioned this at the last meeting. I recall you making that recommendation as chair almost 2 years ago. And yes, there is tremendous opportunity for growth here. For a couple $100,000, and what's different between today and 2 years ago or 18 months ago is Susan Soper. She is the eyes, the ears of all the activity, and she's able to monitor what people are doing and how they're doing it, and if it's quality or not. And she can reach out to people, and she's very vigilant of the 90-day window that staff have, and she has gone out and sat with staff and worked with staff this year to ensure that they're putting in their documentation, and that it's good documentation, so that we don't run the risk of having wholesale documentation, as was the case, as we all know all too well, several years ago. But several years ago, there wasn't a Sue Soper as there is today, and that's literally paying humongous dividends.
Great. Is there other questions about revenue?
Darryl, I'm sorry, I cut you off.
So just a question, just to follow up, really, talking Medicaid. So the revenue that we've received so far, because certainly there's a lag in the process. So when is this revenue that's coming in? Like, when were these services performed?
So the FY20 cost report, for example, the 166,000 and change that we'll be seeing in June was from the previous fiscal year. There is a lag. I don't have the exact dates, but for example, the activity that staff will be engaged in from now until the end of June 30 of 2021, I believe that payment will be part of the first payment next September of 2021. And then there's another set of activities which gets extended out to next December. So right now, anything that we're doing, we're going to see that next fiscal year in either September or in December.
And I guess because I wanted to try and get a better picture of the reimbursement that's coming in higher than you had initially projected. If this is based upon stuff that was submitted from services that were provided pre-pandemic, then it would be reasonable to expect that since March of last year, some of the stuff that we could do to be eligible for Medicaid by virtue of being at home, doing things remotely in the spring and then remotely from the fall, it seems like there would be possibly some less opportunities there for some of these things. And so if that's the case, then maybe some of those higher numbers that Ken had talked to, those might not be things we might not see until maybe a year from now, a year and a half from now, because it seems like there might be a coming dip in what we'd be able to get reimbursed for. And is that somewhat accurate, or have we been able to continue to provide the same level of billable service while we've been remote and then hybrid.
Have there been some dips? Yes. But have there been some rather sharp increases? Absolutely. And Kyle, one of the things that wasn't happening last spring in the early part of this fiscal year, but is happening now, are the readiness payments that we've made to our transportation providers. We made a payment to AA Transportation of almost $833,000. You saw it up here in a budget report. That was not reported previously. So we're going to see the benefits of that payment. I believe probably next December. What's the value of that payment going to be? I don't have that figure here, but again, those transportation payments, which typically would have been part of our paperwork that we would have filed in the fall. We didn't make those payments for this year, for example, because our yellow buses didn't start to run until the middle of January. And plus, we still had outstanding payments, the readiness payments for both AA and Vanpool. And, as I, pointed out earlier, there's an encumbrance in there for Vanpool of at least $263,000. When that gets paid, and it will, hopefully it will be before June 30, we're going to see the benefits of that payment as well. But that payment probably again will be next December of 2021. Does that help, Kyle?
I think so. I mean, I guess can you explain again, kind of just briefly talk through how what you just talked about in regards to like yellow bus transportation ties into Medicaid reimbursement?
Sure. In the fall, one of the big reports that we file, which becomes part of the cost report, we include transportation cost. And this past fall, our yellow buses weren't running yet, so we couldn't report that. And also, our sped transportation wasn't running yet either. So those were two huge numbers that, and plus we had not made payments from last spring either that we made this year as well. So those transportation payments from last spring and also the payments that we've made to date for our yellow buses. And don't forget too that we will be working with AA on a readiness payment, if you will, from the fall to the middle of January. Again, we've not been able to report any of those home to school or sped transportation charges because the vans or the buses weren't running. Once we get all of the related issues resolved, we can report those payments, whatever they may be, and we'll see the impact of those payments, again, probably next December of 2021.
Okay, then that helps, I guess, because I guess like so for me, like when I would think of like Medicaid and the reimbursement, what I would go to would be because you think of medical services because you think it's like health insurance. So I would think of like, oh, like if our nurses are treating a student that is on Medicaid, that would be like we could file for that. If the school psychologist is working with something. And so mentally, I had always just framed it as like staff members working with students who are on Medicaid or kind of meet conditions that would qualify for Medicaid as well. I didn't realize that even just transporting students on a yellow bus is something that would qualify for it. So that was just news to me. I didn't realize that. So.
Any other questions on the revenue side?
Why don't we look at expenses?
All right. Ran this report last week, and on April 1st. That's probably too big. So in the undesignated appropriation, and again, that's the appropriation that we've been using for any and all COVID-related charges, and we've been pulling charges from that and reallocating either to the FEMA grant or to any one of our other federal grants. So as of last week, there was a shortfall in there of $213,000. And we're estimating approximately another $75,000 in expenditures. I am working with Deputy Superintendent Burlow, and Bob and I actually met today for about an hour or so, and we're still looking, and I'll talk about this when we get into the discussion on the SO2 grant, but we're still looking to make adjustments between the general fund in either the SO2 grant or, for that matter, the ESSER 3 grant, which again we're still waiting on for information there. So that you can see there that I had projected a negative balance in that appropriation of $288,000, but that number is not going to hold. I believe it would be much less than that once we finish identifying what will be reclassed through journal entries to either the ESSER 2 or, for that matter, ESSER 3 or the second FEMA application. In terms of salaries and stipends, again, as of last week, there was an available balance of $3.1 million. I'm projecting $100,000, and that's a ultra conservative figure. I believe it'll be less than that. That's the figure that I used in our last report, our last meeting. Day-to-day subs, $100,000 for the fourth quarter of the year. There's been an awful lot of activity with day-to-day subs, and just looking to cover the building. So that's a pretty real number there. It might even be a little bit more than that. Spring coaches, when we did this last week, we had yet to encumber the spring coaches with a value of $85,000. So we'll take care of that. We're looking to do a transfer. We'll talk about that in a couple minutes. There's still some vacancies, as you know, out there. The placeholder for that is $200,000. Again, that's probably a very conservative figure, less than that, given that we're into the fourth quarter of the year. Long-term teacher subs, as I mentioned in a previous meeting, the buildings have hired building subs, approximately 20 building subs. So that's the balance there, and most likely that 34,000 and change will certainly be expensed. 300,000 for additional groups. Again, there is one group whose contract was approved last week by school committee, and those adjustments will be made in the following pay period. And then there's still another group out there as well. ECC adjustment, the principal over there, we're going to move the balance of her salary into the general fund because revenues and that revolving fund will not sustain the expenditure. We're doing a transfer into other operating costs of $335,000. And then the $40,000 I have here is money that I've allocated to make adjustments to resolve the anticipated shortfall in the high school athletic revolving account. So estimated expenditures is approximately 1.8. That still leaves a balance, estimated balance in salaries and stipends of approximately $1.3 million. In terms of benefits, again, we're looking to do a transfer of $575,000. I bumped it up just a little bit to cover the balance of the year, and that's the transfer that we'll talk about in a moment to bring forward. Instructional support. Again, there's really two big numbers in there. One, obviously, is Deputy Superintendent's textbook line. He has approximately $600,000 or so unencumbered. The second number is the teacher PD for the WREA. That is in there as well. Instructional support is also another appropriation where I will be working with Deputy Superintendent Burlow to make adjustments and I'll speak about this in a few minutes, between the general fund and the ESSER 2 grant. And again, I'll talk about that in a few minutes. Operations and maintenance, again, we're looking at approximately $100,000, but there'll be yet more adjustments between the general fund and ESSER 2 in that bottom line that you see there of approximately $72,000 is going to increase. Pupil services, again, there's the $40,000 that I'm allocating to fix the shortfall in the athletic revolving. We're looking to spend approximately $300,000 in sped tuitions, if not more. If not more, other operating costs. Again, there's a transfer to cover the gap for FY21. Transportation. So the 1.8 that I show here, and again, the $1 million will be the transfer or the expense into the transportation stabilization, and that's something that was talked about earlier this evening. The 800,000, and again, that's not the exact number, but that's the cost that not the exact number, but that I'm allocating as a readiness payment for AA. And again, for the third time, I just want to say that's not the exact number. So we're looking at a balanced net appropriation of almost 185,000. Debt service, we are good to go there. So in terms of total expenditures, we're looking at a little bit over $100 million on $100,566,383. And if I can just go back up to the revenues for a second. So we were looking at, between the revenues and the expenditures, we're looking at a bottom line of 713,000. That's a conservative figure. Again, I've walked you through on the expense side. I estimated high on a couple of figures, and plus that 713 does not reflect the additional work of reclassing charges out of the general fund and into the ESSER 2, if that matter, ESSER 3 grant. I know I went through that rather quickly, but I'd be more than happy to answer any questions on the expense side.
So on the expense side, two quick questions. One, you talked about $300,000 in sped tuition, or maybe more. Are we talking about prepaying tuitions to try and reduce the balance of the year, or are we talking about putting that into? I guess that's what I would. Yeah.
So it could be either one. We can certainly prepay tuitions, or secondly, and it depends upon the balance in circuit breaker. But again, we need to have 1.5 million in that carry forward. So if I reduce the balance in general fund from prepaying tuitions, I'll work with Director Smith, and we'll get those tuitions prepaid.
And for the readiness payments, you mentioned AA, but Vanpool would also have to be in that bucket as well, right?
To a lesser degree.
Were they mostly transported already?
They've been running all year. They were transporting our students last summer. Select out of district programs, and AA in district sped. Those vans started to run in early October. Certainly not to the degree that they were running in November, December, but they were running as well. So it's primarily the home to school, because those big yellow buses, they didn't start running until January 19th, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, I apologize. I think I was still thinking when it was AA didn't have her in-district stuff, I was thinking that was still elsewhere. Okay, that's great. Do other people have questions about expenses? So that's probably a good time to ask questions about those budget transfers that are coming up too, since we're on the screen. Malaya?
Mine is not about a budget transfer, but I do have a general question about the substitutes, because that's something I wondered about. How, I guess, I know it's highly unpredictable, but I wonder, how accurate or how certain we are of those numbers, given that, I mean, are they based on our patterns to date? Because I expect those might go up. They might not, but they might. I mean, so I was just curious how certain we are of the substitute line in particular, because it's for extra coverage, and now we have more people in buildings, and I didn't know if that would be a factor.
So there's been a great deal of activity, Malaya, in the subline, and I believe in our last report, I think I had estimated day-to-day subs at about 75,000, so I bumped it up by 25,000. And certainly every payroll, I look at the subline in particular, because again, there has been a great deal of activity in the subline just to get people into the building to cover. And also too, I should point out that not only teacher subs, day-to-day teacher subs, but also overtime for custodians as well. That's been a bit of a challenge also. So that 100,000 is probably on the low end, and we'll be looking at that. We do look at it every payroll.
I know I'm going to go to another salary section because I know we've talked about food services a lot. Have they been able to fill their positions that were open, and is that reflected in this?
She's still recruiting. So in the projections that she shared with the group, or I shared with the group at our last meeting, she assumed that she had her 7 vacancies filled. She does not have those vacancies filled yet. And one thing that Margaret will do if need be is that, again, she's only one person, but she will roll up her sleeves and put on her coat if need be, and jump into the line, especially at the high school if necessary.
Anyone else? All right. So our next item on the agenda are these 3 budget transfers. So I'll first take a motion to recommend to the full school committee a budget transfer of $575,000 from the salaries and stipends appropriation to the benefits and insurance appropriation.
So moved.
It's been moved. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, so it's been moved and seconded. So just in general, Dan, we talked about this at our last meeting in terms of the fact that we have more money in salaries and stipends than we anticipate because we didn't hire all the positions we planned to hire this year. We have more costs and benefits and insurance, mostly due to unemployment insurance costs. And that is the reason for this first transfer. Is that a true statement when we want to defend that, this transfer?
Partially
true. Modify that?
Partially true. I mean, unemployment saw a huge increase this year. But the other reason, Ken, the primary reason is that we built the FY21 budget on the premise that we were going to use school choice as an offset. And we were looking to use a minimum of $300,000 this year from school choice. We have not used a penny out of school choice. We're holding on to our school choice money to help us with the FY22 budget. Secondly, typically too, we would use a portion of the school lunch revolving account to offset insurance and benefits. And again, we haven't touched a dime out of that to offset insurance and benefits. So those costs are being paid out of the general fund at 100%. And thirdly, to a much lesser degree, again, we would use our Title I grant, a very small amount. I think last year was about $15,000 to offset benefits, and that's not the case this year. So all of the benefits costs related to staff are coming out of the general fund, and we're holding on to school choice, number one. We're not tapping into school lunch, number two, because the receipts have been down and there is no money in the Title I of that consequence. And then the other, as you pointed out, is early on in the year, we received an invoice for unemployment. The first invoice that we received was $270,000, I believe it was, going back to last March. And we paid a lot of that out of our initial grant of about $250,000. So the unemployment has been trending downward. It's still greater than last year, but it's been trending downward. So that's reason number 4, I think, or 4 or 5 at this point.
Well, that's really helpful. And is the source of the revenue into that transfer, or did I get that part right in terms of that it's unhired positions? Is that why we have such a balance in salaries and stipends?
Yep. We number of positions that we didn't hire this year, and there were some layoffs that staff were not called back at. Correct.
Carl, do you have a follow-up or your own question?
No.
Okay. Is there other questions, comments, Ben? Seeing none, I'll take a roll call vote. So Member Otmar?
Yes.
Member Mitchell?
Yes.
Member Sullivan?
Yes.
Member Gustafson?
Yes.
And Mills, yes. So that passes. I'll take a motion to recommend to the full school committee a budget transfer of $335,000 from salaries and stipends to the other operating costs appropriation. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Second? Is there a second?
Second.
Member Otmar seconds. Thank you. Dan, do you want to give us a brief read of why we're making this transfer?
But again, Ken, the reason for this transfer is that the Wachusett FY21 budget was approved in March of March 9th of 2020. The final FY21 state budget was approved in late December. And in our budget, this line in our budget was based upon the governor's House 1 budget. Those numbers changed dramatically between the governor's initial budget and the final state budget. There was a variance of well over $500,000, but it has the adjustments have stabilized over the past couple of months, so that this will make that account whole. If you look at the initial FY22 cherry sheet number in the final FY21 cherry sheet, there's a variance of about $18,000 to $20,000. So this closes the gap from when our budget was approved and when the state budget was finally approved in December.
I'm sorry if I'm asking a question you've already answered, but why is it this particular appropriation that we're transferring into as opposed to other appropriations?
So this is the cherry sheet appropriation, charter school. This is the charter school and school choice out that
okay.
we.
Okay, so this is charter school and school choice out. Okay.
Yes.
And it's just a variance between the budget as that we for people who are newer, we always base our budget on the House 1 budget, right? But then, and that's usually the low water mark. And this year, of course, it was way a high water mark. That's up and the only second time it's happened since I've been on the committee that it went down 2000. I don't know, maybe it was the first time since I've been on the committee, but it happened in 2008, of course, as well. Hopefully this year the H1 is again the worst. It's the worst case scenario, although we haven't seen a House budget yet. Hopefully soon. I don't know. So people have questions on this? All right, seeing none, Member Otmar?
Yes.
Mitchell?
Yes.
Sullivan?
Yes.
Gustafson?
Yes.
And Mills, yes. So finally, I take a motion to recommend to the full school committee a budget transfer of $40,000 from salaries and stipends to pupil services appropriation. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Member Mitchell moves. Member Otmar seconds is.
Second.
Good. So I think we already discussed about this covering the athletic revolving. Is that a fair?
That's
my
correct.
memory right?
That's correct.
All right. Does anybody have questions about this? All right, seeing none, Member Elmore,
Yes.
Member Mitchell,
Yes.
Member Sullivan,
Yes.
Member Gustafson,
Yes.
and Member Mills. It says yes. All right, so that is approved. Next item on the agenda is fiscal year 22. So we have revised line item budget, which we won't go through line by line, revised budget book, and federal grant update.
So again, this is the revised line item budget. I do want to make the committee aware that the revised budget book is up on the web page. I also want to state that this is revision number 2 of probably 3 or 4. Why 3 or 4? Because I'd like to, as the state goes through the budget process, I'd like our numbers to be aligned with their numbers. Again, I'm hopeful that when the House numbers come out later on this month, or maybe in a week or so, that they'll be they'll be better than what we saw in the governor's numbers, and that we can make adjustments at least on state aid. But there are a couple other things too, and in speaking with Superintendent McCall, that I do want to get into the revised budget book as well. And so we're going to take a page from the past, especially in terms of identifying for the respective communities their required minimum contributions, which we don't have it in there now, but we'll get that in there. And there are 1 or 2 other things that I do want to put back in that aren't in there now. But in any event, the budget book that's up online is reflective of the committee's approval of the budget back on March 15th.
Are we providing the towns with these updates? Like if there's a new budget book, are we informing them there's something they should look at? Because they're probably not like hitting refresh all the time. It'd just be nice to.
Sure thing. I'll get copies out. I'll make people aware that it's out there, and that this is, version number 2 of, as I said a moment ago, either 3 or 4.
Are the birds saying anything about when the House budget might be coming out?
So, I mean, I had heard last week, probably in the next week or 2, the latest. I guess to be ultra conservative, we could say the end of this month. But before you know it, April's going to be in our rearview mirror. It just seems like things are just flying this year. So hopefully the next week or 2 we'll have those numbers, and I think that'll be a good barometer as to where the Senate will probably land with their numbers.
People have questions? All right, seeing none. Did this cover the LIB and the budget book items on the agenda? Are we moving to the grant update?
We are. Unless there's any other questions, we are. All right. The last attachment is a budget report that I ran. This is the ESSER 2 budget, and this was approved by DESE on March 29th. Just a couple of points about the ESSER 2 grant. There were 3 general areas that were focused in this grant. Number 1, student academic progress, and that is epitomized in the grant with the STAR assessment, instructional technology, and textbooks and software. The second goal was student social and emotional learning. And then the third.
I'm sorry, Dan, just for a second. I think the screen you're showing isn't the screen you mean to be showing. I think you want to go to page 151 of your book.
All right. Did you not? I'm sorry. Is there another budget report there?
I think you're still in the line item budget. I think you want to scroll down or maybe refresh your screen to get to the ESSER 2 budget.
right, are you seeing that now, or were you seeing that now?
It's the same thing as before. It hasn't moved. I hear you clicking, but nothing's happening when you're clicking.
So at my end, okay, let's do this. Let me.
Do you want me to project it because it's on my screen?
Okay, go ahead. Because
Right.
I'm seeing it.
Why don't you turn off your sharing and I'll share.
Yep.
Okay. All right, so is this showing the page now that we were anticipating? Okay, I see some nodding. Go ahead.
It is. Okay, I don't know what happened there, but thank you for taking care of that. So again, there are three general areas in this grant. The first is student academic progress. The second is student social and emotional learning. And then the third is safe buildings. And this grant was written for the balance of FY21 and also FY22. And what I will be doing, is, as I stated earlier, is that I'm working with Deputy Burlow to make some adjustments between the general fund and this grant. So let me just walk you through a couple of the lines here. So the first line that you see there is for contracted services. And so what's behind that number? So there's actually a couple of different numbers that's behind that. Number one, we're going to be doing a journal entry of almost $125,000 out of the general fund and into this grant relative to HVAC work. And again, this is work that's already been done that we'll be backing out of the general fund into the grant. A second number that's part of that 273, approximately 52,700, and these are contractual services for next year, and of that 52K, 50K is allocated to a particular program relative to student mental health services. And then the third number that's part of that 273, approximately almost 97,000, 96,750, is that that money is dedicated to training and professional development, and in particular, 50,000 out of that 96K is allocated to the DEEP program, which is a program that Dr. McCall is looking to initiate, if not this year, next year, relative to anti-racism. So 52,700, 96,750, and 124,436 gets you your 273,886. The second number there are supplies and expenses, and again, that figure is a combination of COVID-related supplies that we'll be journaling into the grant here. The third figure is $18,000, and this $18,000 is money that's allocated for either lunch monitors or bath monitors. Of that 18,000, we've allocated 10 for lunch monitors and 8,000 for bathroom monitors for the $18,000. The next figure, the 11,500. These are stipends to be paid for planning of the summer program. There's two costs. There's two numbers that equal that 11,500. The first number is 3,500 for the summer planning for special education programs, and Director Smith is working on that. Then the second is approximately $8,000 that's allocated. Again, that's Director Smith, and she's working with Dr. McCall on that. So those two figures alone equal the 11,500. The next figure, the 132,000, that is related to textbooks and software materials, and that 132 is going to be those dollars have not been expensed yet. So that would be for the balance of 21 into FY22. Then the last figure there, the 124,345. Again, that is technology that has already been purchased. It's already been received. We'll be doing a journal entry out of the general fund and into the grants. And again, we'll pick up in the general fund approximately 124,000 and change. And that gets you your 617,000. I know I went fast, but that's a quick, well, maybe not a quick overview of the grant, but give you good background onto that grant.
Dan, one quick question: as you know, right now this is not encumbered anywhere. You listed off what it's going to be spent on, but are any of the, and your last statement did say, so there are some expenses that we've already either encumbered or experienced. They're already shown up on the expenses worksheets that we have. This, you know, I guess so at a 10,000 foot level of the 617 that's shown here, how much is that going to pull out of our existing expenses that you've already encumbered?
Sure. Roughly 250,000, Ben. I'm just looking at the HVAC work, for example. That's $124 and change, and I'm looking at the technology. That's another $124. So, you know, there's almost 250 right there. And then looking at the supplies, that's about 25,000. So almost 275.
So one way to kind of look at this is whatever money that whatever number, and I forget what number was there at the end of the expenses revenues, we could assume that we're going to have an additional 250K.
Yes, correct.
Because those will be pulled out and put towards this grant. Okay, thank you.
Yep.
It's Dan, if it's fair to say that some of those were accounted for in that first line, right, on the expense report. I've forgotten the unaccounted for, whatever the line is for that budget, but those are kind of in that bucket there, right?
Actually, the some are, but not all. A lot of the HVAC work is actually in the operations and maintenance appropriation, and the technology is in instructional support appropriation. Again, we're not done looking at the undesignated, Ken. That's what you're referring to, because again, what's in there, Deputy Superintendent Burlow, once we know ESSER 3 will be looking to make adjustments between the general fund and ESSER 3. Again, assuming that you know, it's going to be 2.5 times what the ESSER 2 figure was.
Malaya, did you have a question?
I did. I was I have two. I think they're both small questions though, or quick. You mentioned that there was, I think, $50,000 for a mental health program. Is that a new program, or the one that we currently have? Is it the William James program, or is it something else?
This is an existing program, and
Interface, Malaya.
The what? Interface.
Yes,
Yeah,
it's William
I know.
James.
Yeah.
Yep.
Whatever. I've heard it called different things, but so it's for that program.
Yes.
Which we already have, which we will continue to have hopefully after this. Okay.
Yes.
So I'm glad we can bill it to that, but we need to reflect those kinds of things, I think, because that's an expense that we're using one-time money for that is an ongoing expense. I'm glad we can use it, and it will certainly help. But I just want to make sure we don't lose sight of that, even though it's only $50,000. And then my other question was that you'd mentioned the summer programs and working with Director Smith. Are those, but you mentioned two different programs. Are they both for special education students, or is she helping to coordinate whatever program will serve other students as well?
Yeah, so I've been working with Chris on this as well. Dan, I'll just jump in. Bob and I talked about putting a couple $1,000s toward helping out with one of the programs, and then the other one is just really seeing if we can get ahead of programming for the summer, if that's something that we can get enough interest in terms of staff as well. So that's what we're working on now.
Is it something, when you talk about staffing, is it something that we could look to hire other staff from outside of our district if needed, just for a summer position?
Yeah, you always can, but there's going to be a huge lack of,
Well, I know.
and I'm just being honest.
Yeah.
I'm hearing this from superintendents all over the place. Very few staff are interested in working. We're actually going to send a survey out to staff to find out whether or not they're interested in doing summer work this year.
I hope it's not the case, but I do understand that because they're all exhausted, obviously.
Yeah, they are.
So
They are.
I just checking though.
Yep.
And then my last question was that according to all this, we would free up about, you said about $250,000 from the general fund. And then I was thinking about this. I know our budget for next year included, like, I want to say it was $200,000 for PPE, for example, that's not reflected in this. Is there a reason that wasn't included? Because that would also free up some funds, and it's a very logical COVID-related expense.
Well, the other thing that we can do is we have SR3 coming in, Malaya.
Yeah.
So we'll probably just pull it out of there.
Okay.
There was the commissioner did put something out today. There's like actually some free PPE if we can get it by get over to Franklin by Friday.
Oh.
So I'm going to talk with Dan and Bob and Jim Cavello tomorrow. We're going to see whether or not we can. Dan wants to make a road trip with a U-Haul.
Yeah. Great. I think you could probably find a volunteer to do that if you put the call out to enough people, because that's saving us a lot of money. Not me, but
so we're going to see what they have available.
I appreciate that. Okay.
Yep.
So those are my 3 questions. The one other thing I did want to note is that I was in, I'm sure you do this, but I was in an MASC workshop last week about a couple things. And one of the things they talked about is we talk about telling our story a lot, and we don't do a lot of it. But one of the things they talked about was not just on paper, but really documenting changes that are occurring by this money, even if it's things like HVAC, where we take a picture of the before and after, or pictures of kids in a summer program. They really emphasize the need to, not need, but the wisdom of documenting how we're using these excess funds and the changes being made and how they're being used, even if they make sense to us. Show the technology and show the HVAC repairs, and just so we have some documentation to help tell our story, so they don't say, "Oh, well, you're getting this money. How are you wasting it?" We're not wasting it.
Yeah, you know what?
But their point was that you can tell people on paper, but they're really encouraging people to really illustrate. And I know you put some pictures in your newsletters and some things from time to time, and things like that, because next year when we are looking for budgetary funds that won't go down very much, people will want to know how we've used this money. And it's also looking ahead to, if you put money into education, this is, what can happen. So I was passing that along because I think it would be useful to keep in mind as we go about spending this.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Malaya. I can tell you, in terms of most of our money, again, a lot of it has gotten toward PPE. So we do have some nice pictures of PPE of, boxes of masks stacked up to the ceiling, but, and then hand sanitizer and so forth. But,
yeah.
We have spent an awful lot of money on building maintenance on the HVAC systems and so forth. So some of that could be pictures, but a lot of it's just person time. It's just salary. It's overtime. It's our people are working weekends. They're working. We have to bring in electricians. We're bringing in plumbers. So I guess one of the things we could do is look at how we can quantify that. I was actually talking with Bob about that this afternoon, because I think that's just a huge expense that people need to understand. We've put a lot of money into our buildings this year. A lot.
Right. And I think, that did come up, and the people that demonstrating what pays for that, but they were also, this is crazy, but they actually had an example. They took a picture of wires. It was such a small thing, but their point was it may not make a big impact, but at least then you can show people this is one of the projects we did. We're like, we bought monitors for rooms and things, and just
Yep.
to have pictures, even if it takes most of the money is going to the people that install them and do the work. It's still the projects, and you can decide what to do with that. I'm just passing it along.
No, that's an
Made sense to
interesting.
me.
It's a good idea. It's tangible.
All right. Well, does anyone else have any questions on this item on the agenda? All right. Seeing none, the next item on the agenda was discussion of the contract to the Director of Business Finance. We did have that conversation in executive session, and it's in the hands of the superintendent at the moment. The next item on the agenda is approval of the minutes of the March 25th, 2021 meeting, which I believe were in the call to meeting. Yes, they were. So is there a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved.
Moved. Is there a second?
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Is there a discussion about minutes? Seeing none, I'll take approval by unanimous consent. Okay. So those are approved. The next item on the agenda is the timing for the next meeting. Dan, what are we thinking? Like, our next school committee meeting is the 26th of April, right? I mean, the one after the one that's coming up on Monday, right? So would you find it useful? I don't know. April vacation doesn't mean anything to me because I don't get off that week, but I imagine it does to you all. The week before is April 19th is vacation week. When does it make sense to me? Like, when is it useful for you to get our input on the next thing? Because, meeting the same week as the school committee when we met this week doesn't strike me as being particularly good use of people's time. I don't know what attendance we'll get on the 19th. Maybe people, or the week of the 19th, maybe people here can talk about this, but I don't know what Daryl, Dan, or what the.
So Ken, the 19th is a holiday. That's that's Patriots Day. So that's that's not an option. I believe I'm around that week. So we could maybe Wednesday or Thursday night, even if we, and who knows? I mean, maybe we'll have some information on the House budget at that point in time. And even if we have it in a bridge meeting, of an hour or so, we can certainly look at where we might be with the state numbers if the House budget, is out that time. I think that's probably, what may be driving our meeting. Otherwise, we can still look at, an item for the rest of the year. Obviously, is going to be our revenues and our expenditures. Just keeping an eye on those to ensure that, we hit our mark, especially with some of these carry forwards, because we're so dependent upon them for the 22 budget.
I would throw out there that, in the absence of a House One budget, maybe having a meeting the week of vacation week, again, I don't care, but isn't appropriate. But if there is a reason to have a meeting, like the House One budget comes out, and that's going to greatly affect our deliberations on the 26th, right? Because that it might affect assessments, it might affect the way we approach town meetings, and I think we should meet because it would be important and worth it. So my throwing it out there is, why don't we pick a day that week? Maybe Randy can send around and consult with you, see what days might work for you, see what days work with the committee, around all the other things people have in their lives. And then if there's no compelling, like, I don't want to meet just to discuss, routine, but if there's a compelling reason we want to meet that would affect the deliberations of the school committee meeting on the 26th, then I think we meet. If there's not, we don't. Does that seem like a reasonable approach?
Yes.
All right. So why don't we set a date where that is a cancelable date, unless there's a compelling reason to not to keep it.
Thursday night, Wednesday or Thursday night.
Personally, for me, Wednesday is a little bit better, but I don't know what other people think.
I have a meeting Wednesday, but it should be over by 7. So
All right. So we'll do Wednesday at 7 with plans to cancel it unless the House comes up with their budget. And in time for Dan to think about it, right? Like if it comes out that day, then it doesn't really, like, you know, it's interesting conversation point, but you'll need to have time to review the impact. All right. So that is the last item on our agenda. So I would take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
It's been moved. Is there a second?
Second.
And so by unanimous consent, we will adjourn. And thank you all for your work and for your attendance tonight.
Good night. Thank you.
Right.
Thank you. Yep, good night.